one of the core points of failure of politics in the United States is the budget. Because if you are governed by lobbying and by campaign contributions, you cannot have an effective fiscal policy. On the one hand, you have a population which votes, and so you need somehow to not have complete turmoil. And so you can't really cut, so far, Social Security, for example. You have not been able to cut Medicare or Medicaid. You can't stop paying interest on the debt, and they don't want to stop the military, which is about 3.5% to 4% of GDP if you include everything. If you take those items, the pensions, and including the various kinds of pensions, including veterans benefits, and the health care, and the interest on the debt, and the military, you have roughly 20% of GDP in spending. Our taxes are around 16% of GDP at the federal level. So you start out, even before you have any domestic programs at all, with a deficit of about 4% of GDP. Now, in our lobby-run politics, the first rule is don't raise taxes. So the highest goal in fiscal policy of the Trump administration is to extend the low taxes that were voted 10 years ago on corporate taxes, which have basically been gutted. We don't collect corporate tax except in a very small amount now, and they want to extend that. Now, our budget deficit includes some public services also, some little bit for infrastructure, which is falling apart, a tiny bit for housing, some for labor, some for education. And that adds up to roughly another 3% of GDP if you include everything, the judicial system, the public administration, all the infrastructure, all the environment, National Science Foundation, everything except the military, the pensions, the health care costs, the interest costs, and a couple of other mandatory things. All civilian government is about 3% of GDP. It's not enough. That's why we solve no social problems in the United States. But if you add in the parts that they don't want to cut or can't touch, plus this meager 3%, you end up with a budget deficit of about 6 to 7% of GDP, which is what we have now. This has been going on for 20 years, so our debt is 100% of GDP and rising. The Congressional Budget Office yesterday issued a new report saying by 2055, the debt will be at 155% of GDP on current policies. So what is Trump trying to do? Trump is trying to cut taxes relative to baseline. This is all technical because the baseline includes ending some of the tax cuts from 10 years ago. But he wants to extend those. How to do that with such a huge budget deficit? There's no way. There is no way to do this other than to completely destroy the civilian government. And that's what Elon Musk is doing day by day. He's not rooting out waste. He's just closing the government as much as possible. The public will hate this week by week, month by month, when nothing works, when they can't get health care, when there's no one to answer a call for Social Security, and so on. And that's where we're heading in the next months. That's why I was saying you can't ask for more funding for Ukraine in that context, period, because there's really going to be at least a public brawl. Trump will win this budget battle, in my best estimation. It will be brutal and ugly to essentially keep the revenues completely inadequate and brutally slash spending for poor people or even working class people in America. But he'll probably get this through because it'll be a straight party line vote enforced by Elon Musk, who will threaten anyone who steps out of line. But believe me, you'll see a very ugly, very unhappy country, a very unpopular government, and nothing's going to get better out of it because nothing that's being done is going to make people's lives easier. Higher tariffs is not going to make people's lives easier. And the budget deficit will remain significant. And this is, I think, what we're likely to see within a few months. In other words, not a president who is using his vast popularity with the masses to push through radical change, but rather a very unpopular government that is in fundamental inconsistency of policy with what his own voters want. And then what do? Well, you can deport more people, you can try to make more noise, you can double down, become more authoritarian. I don't know what will happen, but it will not be a happy course in the coming months. And that's why I believe we could talk about the constructive side. I'm very optimistic about this region. I really am. And I don't think the U.S. is going to upset anything in this region, actually. And I think we should be clear about that. But I don't believe in a grand bargain or anything else. I think the U.S. is mainly to be viewed with some sadness, maybe a little bit of alarm, but not to expect something very constructive because the contradictions are just too large right now. And we need to work out a new political arrangement in the country. And we're not going to do that simply. It's going to be many, many years, in my view, before all of these contradictions get sorted out.